Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Misconceptions. We are really lucky today to have a conversation with Yaakov Rabinowitz. Many of you, actually, probably all of you who are listening, have heard Shifra's story. And I think that, to be honest, Yaakov, that Shifra's podcast probably reached the most people. And I had the most feedback about her interview. It hits so many different buttons for people, areas of like, how did I never know this about her? Because I know her, or how is it that that it took so long for her to get help or to figure out like how to get support? And but mostly there was a lot of feelings around y- this being something that we need to talk more about, especially because many people found it unusual. And I think that, I know Shifra and I are talking about doing like a follow-up conversation because she's like, there's so much more we need to talk about now, like how I'm doing now. And I think that this is such a fabulous follow-up conversation because I think for me, hearing Shifra's story so much about your involvement in it, obviously, as her husband, is an incredibly impactful component of how things played out, right? If she'd been married to somebody else, this would have looked pretty different. And I really admire and respect so much about the two of you as a partner, as husband and wife. Welcome, Yaakov, to our podcast.
Thank you, Tamara. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity.
So for full disclosure, Jakob also works in my practice. He is our male therapist. Um, and, I love that I can send you some of the clients who are seeking specifically a male provider, or for some of the men who really would only like to talk to a man. And it's an amazing, sometimes we've actually had opportunity where you're working with couples that Shifra's seeing the wife and you're seeing the husband. And I think that's just the coolest way to get couples individual therapy, but kind of with a unique angle. So glad that you are willing to talk to us today. So when I think about Shifra's conversation with me more than once, one of the things that I think comes up the most is this idea of I didn't really know if I wanted to have children. Like I kind of just knew that I would she would say she just kind of knew that this is just what you do and the feelings will follow. I'm wondering if you want to take us through the beginnings of your married life together around if you knew that perspective, what you understood about that. Schiffer's pretty much an open book. She's pretty awesome in that way. I love that about her. But I really want this to be about your story in that experience. And maybe you want to take us to wherever you want to begin.
Okay, well, where shall we begin? Uh, I guess I'll address the question more directly, which is it wasn't something that I did understand until um, much later because it wasn't something we ignored. I actually have a very vivid memory of, we met in Israel and, sitting there in a cafe having a discussion about, well, how many kids do you want? And how many kids do you want? And, having this funny realization that everyone most people end up plus minus one from what they grew up with. Um, and she has four siblings. I have three siblings. So okay, somewhere between three and five seems close enough. Um, and but it took a very long time before, um, well, really until after having a really difficult time, with her first pregnancy and postpartum depression with our oldest daughter. Before some of these realizations became clear about some of her difficulties because I did listen to Shipper's podcast and I definitely lived those experiences with her, but I didn't do any of that recently. And so the I suppose maybe the way that I kind of understood things is that kind of Schiffer was following a path in life with an assumption of how things would go, and kind of these uh, little doubts about whether this is really for me, and kind of but not sitting there thinking about am I going to take a radically different path in life and make decisions that are very kind of unusual or different for people coming from our backgrounds and our community, and so this so I guess what I would say is, kind of we went into marriage assuming that we would have, I don't know, a moderate sized, family, and it wasn't until having a child was really hard where this became a real question of how many children will we be able to have.
What do you remember when she was pregnant, in that first pregnancy? What do you remember during that time in terms of the pregnancy, not even getting to postpartum, but just in terms of being pregnant? What do you remember experiencing or feeling?
Um, so it was a very, we were very young. It was very early, you know, I guess we were older than many people, but the yeah, it felt like everything was new, and we're figuring out how to do everything, and we didn't know what was normal and what was not normal, and there's no one telling us, kind of guiding us through, holding our hands and telling us, how things should be and how we should deal with stuff. And just when, kind of we were starting to figure out those things and getting those, challenges sorted out, Shiver being pregnant and with pregnancy came along, really significant morning sickness in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. Um, and it took us, I think, almost the second, trimester before anyone told us that there's medication to help with that, which was another thing that was really frustrating for us, which is that I guess we didn't get the best help with it. She got a medication which helped somewhat, but she still ended up in the hospital, in the second trimester because she couldn't keep food down at some point, even with medication. And
Was she actually
so,
ever diagnosed with hyperemesis gravidarum? Like, did she ever actually
no,
have HG?
no, I don't think
Diagnosed.
it was that severe. The only time she really wasn't able to keep down. The only time there was that concern was this 2 or 3 day period when she ended up in hospital. They put her on Zofran, and but I don't think it got quite to that point. But it did get to the point where it made her life pretty miserable.
Right.
Um, and yeah, and then I guess for me, my life went into figuring out how to try to support her, how to try to help her, how to try to kind of help her manage this new and unexpected burden,
Mhm.
which was also a new thing. And part of, I think, why this was somewhat complicated was, at this point, I was, I wasn't working. I was in, graduate school, and I was, part time, and I was in yeshiva part time, and so this gave me, a certain amount of flexibility, with my time. But Chipper was working a lot, and she was, the one who was bringing, home most of our money and our income, and this just kind of added to it, where she worked a lot and she was constantly busy and, kind of stressed and sick and nauseous and I didn't want to be. I don't think she
Right.
want any of those things. And I think that all piled on to make things really hard for her. Um, but I think the truth is, though, it could be that this is my fuzzy memory, but while things were hard for her in pregnancy, I don't think um, things got really bad and started to impact, kind of our relationship until after,
Right.
our daughter was born. I think that's when things kind of really took a turn. And, you know, what became like difficulty for her, where I was able to support her, turned into, much more significant depression, which we also didn't, identify right away because, this was one of the one of the things, for me was, I was in graduate school studying clinical social work at the time, so you think that that would help. And, she was working as a therapist, and you think that would be something. She had a history of depression. You think that would, tell us something. But to be honest, you know, Shipra has a huge personality. And that's a big part of who she is and how she interacts with people and the work that she does. And so, like, this is one thing where she wasn't lying in bed, and she was working, um, and there was she, so this is one thing, but honestly, the internally, I think she was pretty miserable. Um, and the most, from my perspective, the most difficult and painful part of that is it led her to be like incredibly irritable.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and that was a part that um, I think was really difficult for me and for our relationship, in which um, I, the more I tried to help and tried to support her and tried to make things easier for her, um, the more imperfect my efforts were, and in
Yeah,
her eyes, and the harder it became to continue trying,
right.
over the course of, you know, it was 6 months, a year and a half.
Right. I want to comment on couple of things. One is this idea of like how much expectation we have on women in particular, even newly married women, as well as even as marriages progress, like the expectation of working and of supporting and of financial responsibility, as well as the home life and their own personal pursuits of profession or schooling, there's so much loaded on. And then, oh, by the way, we're just going to make you nauseous all the time, day and night. And you're going to not have many people listening to you about how sick you really are. Because maybe, this is always what I find so profound is how often we're saying, oh, well, it wasn't HG, but she was really, really sick most of the day, most of the time, but she maybe didn't qualify with the full criteria of hyperemesis. And yet, at that point, we almost like assume that that's normal. Like there's something that we are just ignoring in terms of the intensity of the implication of these illnesses, of being sick all the time. How many of us get a stomach virus and are like, I can't talk to anybody for 24 hours versus like, no, you're expected to also go to work and also be responsible and also cook dinner. Oh, by the way, right? Even if you can't stand the smell of chicken, right? Like there's just this expectation you're just going to do it. And I think that really disrespects what it means to have a pregnancy on top of responsibility, potentially also on top of depression, right?
Yeah, and it, the truth is that this is I think so in Shifra's interview, like she talked about, one of the most difficult things is you know she's not sure she wants to have more children, and she definitely was not sure if she wanted to have more children after the first one, and after the second one, it kind of she came to this realization. It's not just 3 months or 6 months or 9 months for her. It was 2 years of being sick, not being herself, of between pregnancy and two really difficult physical postpartum recoveries, and then nursing and not sleeping, and then dealing with the emotional kind of aftermath, um, kind of that came along with those two depressions, and
Right.
two kind of postpartum periods. Like, in her mind, like, 2 years in a life is a really long time.
Absolutely. And I think, and then we balance that, or we like the counterbalance to that is, but I really want to have a large family for many women. It's like, but I also want to
Yeah,
have more, but I want to have kids, but I want to keep going. And I think there's a lot of like kind of like pushing down or ignoring the actual implications of the medical condition on the mental health. Like how often do we hear women just saying, I'm just going to like white knuckle my way through the pregnancy. I'm just going to get through it and then I'll be fine. But like you just said, it can be 2 years of distress. And that doesn't, the body is weary. There's a weariness, there's a wearing down on the body when exposed to this level of intensity, stress, potentially trauma for 2 years, potentially more, right? That is not, as the psychiatrists like to say, benign, right? It is
mhm,
not benign. It does have implications both on her and then also on the marriage. Like you just described, that her presentation of depression was irritability, which is very common, right? Very common for women who have depression and anxiety, and men as well, to present with one of their big symptoms is rage and irritability. You're right. We don't always see depression as like I'm in bed under the covers. Sometimes depression can be called an agitated depression, where they're actually awake, they're getting stuff done, but they're really agitated in their interpersonal reactions, and they're active and activated, but they're not under the covers and sad and mopey, but they're not okay inside. Right. Do you
yeah.
remember when Shifra told you? Do you remember that moment where she began to express to you what's going on? Or did you like, how did that disclosure begin to occur? Were you the one realizing something was not okay? Or was she beginning to realize?
Shipra is the one who picked up on it first, and um, like it's funny how memory, kind of works, but I have this like flash of memory of, I think we got into an argument. Yeah, I don't get into a lot of arguments in general in my life. Um, but I think I was frustrated or upset with something she said or something she did or something she didn't do. And and her response was, "Let me realize how miserable I am
Mm.
and depressed that I've been for the last 6 months." And my answer was no, I didn't. And and the truth is, I don't think that she realized that that's what it was, until she finally got to the hindsight and realized, like, this is not what life is supposed to be. Like,
Mm.
this is not what my life was. This is not, you know, norm, the way that she felt. But sometimes, we kind of forget about this. And, it's, this happens with so many things in our life, because people have asked, like, what took so long? Um, and part of what happens is, and this is something, personally, I guess, experienced, and I see something as well in my clinical practice, in which when you, especially when you're starting with like from a place of love and wanting to support the other, like it was just a problem. Oh, like if you would stub your toe, I'd come over and ask, "Are you okay?" And and then it happens again and again. Like so, you keep dealing with the problems as they come up, until you realize that problem is not the interaction. It's not this individual moment or this individual, kind of feeling or experience. It's the fact that this is life. Is that
Mhm.
you're not getting better. Is that it's not I'm okay and then I hurt myself, or I'm okay and then I'll go, this terrible bummer, thing happened. It's this is my life and it's not changing. It's not reverting to normal after this negative interaction or experience. Um, and Yeah, and so I think that's part of, what took us a long time to realize that this wasn't having a bad day, or this wasn't, kind of me being, a bad husband, and a bad partner. It was her suffering, I suppose is a better way of saying it.
When you began to realize, based on Shipra's insight and her, her disclosure to you, do you remember trying to get help yourself? Like, I know Shifra did reach out trying to figure things out, but do you remember your own involvement in that?
Um, so in that first episode, um, I did not. Um, my focus was on getting her help for a bunch of different reasons. One is because I felt like she's the one who needed help a lot more than I did. Two is because I was in graduate school at the time, so I did have access to therapy um, through the student center, and I did go a couple times, but I don't know if I went then. And I went before, and I did end up. Okay, so I don't remember at that point, but
I was
yeah.
actually asking more about you getting help for Shifra. Like, were you
Ah,
involved in engaging for like, even I think about how many people call their rabbi, call their mother, call their father, and they're told like, I don't know what's wrong," or um, maybe she's just a bit of postpartum, right? Not really understanding the intensity of what is actually happening. I'm wondering what your experience was in that way.
so in that sense, I think Schiffer and I were really focused on each other, and it didn't really like occur to me to ask other people help besides for helping her get in touch with a therapist, and then eventually a psychiatrist as well. Um, it- I guess for me it was also a similar experience with Schiffer, that she didn't realize she was depressed until it had been so long since she remembered being happy, and for me, it didn't kind of realize that this was not a that our life was not okay until it until I couldn't remember it being okay, and something just broke, and it went from not being okay to being, I guess, a little bit worse than that. And so um yeah, I don't know if it's uh, you know, I guess in general I'm a person who is inclined on being somewhat self-reliant, and just my first reaction is never, oh, let's ask for help. And again, I'm a person who works as in a helping profession,
Mm. This
and
does not bode
uh,
well for for the therapist role that you hold.
well, in my defense, I was 24 years old and not yet a
That's right.
therapist, and I was learning how to be, a husband and a father for the first time, and I guess I didn't understand, didn't look at, um, I didn't have that same relationship with my parents, my support system um, that, that I, that they're looking as like this front line, like, oh, is this normal or is this how we do things? It kind of, they prepared me, they gave me so much, they taught me everything. And then they pushed me out in the world to learn how to live life. And that's what I was doing. Um, and once we had a name for it, so like, yeah, you know what to do if the person's feeling depressed, like go to a therapist. And so I guess in that sense, I wasn't, yeah, like in that early period, it didn't, for better or for worse, I didn't think to or didn't know to, ask, is this normal or
Mhm.
do we need help? Well, maybe part of me also was afraid of the answer.
Sure,
And
sure.
um, yeah,
Maybe if I could just do this or just do that, it'll get better on its own. Like, I think that's such a
yeah,
common perspective, right? Or how do I know that this is, how do I know that this is really not normal? Like maybe it is. And how do I know otherwise? Right.
yeah. Well, after a certain amount of time, also I came to this belief, which is uh, that this is my fault. That, oh, like I just wasn't sensitive enough. I wasn't careful enough. That I'm not doing enough job. I just need to figure out how to, you know, manage this dynamic to be more sensitive to Shifra, to, kind of be more consistent for Shifra, and then things will be better. And then we'll be okay, until I realized that, like, that's impossible. And I'm not a person who's, kind of very, kind of sensitive or finicky, or I'm a person who's very loving and caring and very patient, and very determined. And so when I came to the point where like, no, I can't, this is not a game I can win. This is not like
Right.
a
Right.
puzzle that I can just optimize or learn or solve, or,
Mm.
so that's, I think, led us to that tense conversation, which ultimately led us to getting help, which
Right.
took a long, a long time to find, and a long time to take, to take its effect, but ultimately gave us our lives back, and brought
Right.
us to a wonderful place in life.
Do you remember what it was like parenting in those early years, those early 6 months after birth? Like your parenting experience was different than her parenting experience, obviously. What was it like for you? Because it sounds like you were managing quite a bit, like trying to figure out what would be being how to be that perfect husband, which was impossible. But also, I'm imagining taking up some of the responsibility for your daughter's care. Do you remember that time?
Yeah, so we've always had I guess, a somewhat untraditional um, divide of responsibilities. Um, I've always done most of the cooking, um, and and most of the cleaning, and a lot of the, the household chores. And even from the very beginning, I share the night duty with Shipra, and she bumped, and I can't remember if I took the late shift or the early shift. I think I took whatever. But we really split up just the responsibilities in a, I guess, intuitive way that made sense to us, where I did things that I was good at, and she avoided things that she wasn't good at, and I took as much off her plate as I could. And um so but I think one interesting thing is, um like, one of the things that Schiffer talks about, where, you have this thing, that a lot of parents describe, of this, magical moment, the first time you hold that child in your arms, and like, oh, all the problems disappear, and you're filled with love, and your life is transformed. Um, and for me, and she thought for her, like, it never came. And I don't know if she mentioned this, but her first reaction to when she held our daughter for the first time was Ew,
Yeah.
because
Ew, gross.
she told
She's
him
so
like she like,
slimy.
exactly, and she knew that would happen, and she told him, please, 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 just wipe her off before you give her to me, and whatever. Someone that didn't translate as well to one of the nurses, and she tried to, and what so, um, but uh, it's interesting for me. I didn't. I guess it was a somewhat. It was very surreal, like sitting there and like this is our baby, and I'm a father, and you know, but it didn't feel like this magical transformative moment. It's just like, okay, and now I learned, spent the past year and a half learning how to be a husband and married life, and kind of having my own home and not living in a dormitory anymore, and now we're figuring out how to take care of a baby, um and just okay, so it's the next new thing, the next set of kind of new life challenges, but and I love my children, have wonderful, amazing experiences with them, but I didn't. It's not like I didn't have this kind of magical touching God moment. The first time I saw that precious little baby, um, which was yeah. I don't know. So I guess that's something that we shared, and one of the interesting things also where I didn't fully understand I guess Shifra and some of her challenges with parenting is because uh, I guess she's so good at it. From before she reads incredibly quickly. Like, she'll go through a few hundred pages, in an afternoon. Um, and so, before we got married, she was reading all the books and just giving me the cliff notes, on marriage. And before we had a child, and she was going over the books on parenting and giving me the cliff notes and learning about intuitive parenting and all these things and kind of these all these strategies and philosophies and she comes from a family of educators and she had tons of experience working in schools and working with children of all ages and from the very beginning, uh, again, there were just tons of physical things that were difficult. She had this, really difficult delivery and this really difficult, physical recovery, and she had like, difficulty nursing and difficulty with, with so many things. And um, but when it came to actually taking care of her children, she's always been exemplary. And uh, and I learned how to do it by watching her. And it's like, okay, tell me what to do, and I'll do it, or show me what to do, and I'll do it. Um, and so I guess I think that's a long way of answering the question, but that's yeah, I guess that was kind of sort of how things developed, and the when it came to like when I look back on it, it wasn't like that there was a burden, that developed like where like I can't manage like all of this work, or maybe it was frustrating in a day and like I needed some help, like I don't know, cleaning up after dinner or sweeping or something like that. But my the things in my life were not unmanageable. It was, I guess for me, it was just the negative, pattern of uh, interaction that we'd kind of falling into that had made things or turned things into, a somewhat unmanageable or kind of unhappy place for us.
What's so interesting to me also is that you described that she was able to do the parenting piece. Like it was a responsibility. She filled her responsibilities and filled it well, which also I think can be confusing when
Yeah.
people think about postpartum depression and anxiety. Like the expectation is that we would see her not wanting to hold the baby, not wanting to attend the baby, not wanting to take care of the family. And yet she did those things anyways, but she was suffering inside, right? It was only when she was able to say to you, I'm miserable. I am so unhappy. And I think that's a really good warning. That's a warning kind of flag for anybody who's listening to this conversation that don't get thrown off by how well they might be doing in terms of their productivity with the child or attention and maybe even overt attachment like attending to the child does not mean that they're not suffering inside. It's an
Yeah.
interesting thing to be really thinking of um just seeing them do a good job doesn't mean that they're feeling the feelings that are aligned with doing a good job. Usually if I do a good job, I feel really good about myself, but if for her those were two different experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, I think part of also what took me a long time to figure out was, um, Schiffer would sometimes bring up that idea that we talked about, that it's it's supposed to, there's, but where's that magical feeling? Where's that magical love that's supposed to come from somewhere? I was like, I don't really have it either, but like it's okay. Like it's cute and it's fun. It's just, and she's ours, and she makes great pictures. Though Shipra says she was ugly until she was 6 months old or something like that. She's a thing about babies, but um and we, at the same, but she was always funny. But so and it just took me a while to like to put things together, which like, why do you care? Like, okay, so like that's not our reality, so that's not our experience, but so what? And didn't realize the reason so what is because I'm miserable. And if I had this amazing thing, then this wouldn't feel like such a burden. It's like, yeah, I'll run this marathon, get something on the other end, but not just sit there on this treadmill, this hamster wheel, because endlessly torturing myself for what? Because
Right,
I'm supposed to, because I have to.
right,
And then I guess that leads to the depressing question of, then what is my life and why am I like,
right.
which I think is took me a while to understand, kind of the context and the significance of those questions.
When did you notice that she began to get better?
Um, I don't remember like a light bulb moment.
Mm, mm,
Um, because I guess I would say that we always had whatever, kind of enjoyed each other's company when we had it. That we both, we had alternating schedules for a very long time, and mostly saw each other's, on the weekends and very late at night, tending to a little
mhm.
baby and things like that.
Sure.
Um, but it, it it feels like the problem was solved very much in the way that it came, which is, it kind of just slowly crept into our life until, you know, the happiness was, kind of sucked out of it. And then it slowly crept out of our life until we realized like, oh, things are kind of good again. And,
Mhm.
and it was this, slow, yeah, it was this slow process of months, that were permeated with a lot of disappointments with this therapist not working out, that therapist not working out, and trying, schlepping to Brooklyn late at night for this appointment, and kind of trying to find a psychiatrist, and going through, kind of all of this blood, and this was not being a good fit, and really difficult, kind of stressful work challenges, for her, and kind of all these things. But at the same time, like then there was just more and more good, less and less of, kind of the criticism or these negative interactions until you kind of we came to this realization at some point, which is things are pretty good,
Mhm.
things are okay, and um, but like it wasn't like a transformative moment.
Mhm.
Um, it's interesting. I think there was like but there was a second important like moment that we had, which is at least in my experience, so I talked about how we had, there's this vivid flash of that conversation in which she first told me, that she'd been depressed for the past 6 months, or um and you know it bothered me after that, which is at some point, like after that, Shifra, would keep bringing up, like how amazing our relationship was, and and how lucky she feels, and and how unusual she thinks our relationship was, and I never said anything, but it bothered me every time because I didn't. It took me a while to realize, but from my perspective, our relationship started out, unbelievable and amazing, um, but it was not unbelievable and amazing. It was really, in truth, in hindsight, somewhat unhappy for me.
Sure.
And she just had no idea. Like, and she thinks like this is amazing, that this is the perfect, like idyllic relationship that people dream of. Like, well, it's not the one I dreamed of.
Mhm.
Until, we spent, a weekend away and we were driving late at night on our way home. And she whatever made one of those comments. And I said, I don't I don't I don't think our relationship is so extraordinary and exemplary. And we had a really, really difficult conversation about, what my experience had been, over the past year or more, that she had been struggling, and I've been sitting there trying to help in every way that I could, um, and was just constantly left with the feeling and these the reminders that I wasn't good enough for her. My
Yeah.
efforts weren't good enough. Um, really left me in this, you know, and it wasn't, and I didn't realize how serious of a problem it was until, like, I I started wondering, like, is this going to work? You know, is this, because I tried everything to try to, fix myself and fix the problem. And I got to the realization, which is I don't think that I fix myself enough to, kind of thrive in this dynamic. And so then what happens? And so, where does the future lie? And like, and will our relationship last? And and that's like a really, like, sad, depressing thought to me, because I guess I felt like I'm a really easy person to have a relationship with, and like, and it still wasn't enough. And I didn't know how to put that into context. And so, that was that. I guess that was the first time. So that I think that was really strong tipping point, and actually, you know, eventually led us to, um, whatever, to find, kind of therapist for myself, and to actually for the first time, look into couples counseling, just uh, to
Sure.
help us, you know, I guess, fix the consequences of everything that we went through the past 2 years at that point.
Yeah. We have to acknowledge that that idea of the casualty of either illness or poor care or these kind of, these kind of situations not getting attended to because either we don't know that they need to be attended to or because we get the wrong direction. I was working with somebody recently who kept saying that they were being told, but it's normal. And I'm going, this is not normal. Like it might be common, but it doesn't help when someone says, "Yeah, it's normal after you have a baby to have a hard time. It's normal that you should be very irritable. It's normal." It's not normal. And what you're expressing here is the actual casualty of illness not being attended to well and properly, and the negative implication on the spouse as well as on the marriage. So wife can get better, the woman can get better, and the husband is left going, "Hey, now does anybody paying attention to what how this impacted me? Is anybody going to talk to me about how hard that was to live through, especially when you say like the negative implications really related to the relationship for you? You were able to pick up
Yeah,
the pieces of taking care of your children, your child, your house. That was nothing. It wasn't like, oh, well, I had to pick up all the dirty dishes, and you were okay with that part. But the woman you married and loved and cared for, who you enjoyed her company, was missing for quite a period of time. And so when we talk about like, well, what if I don't, some I've had the question like pretty much every time I've given a presentation on perinatal mood disorders is like, well, if we don't do anything about it, will it just go away? And the answer actually statistically in general is yes. Okay. But the question is what are we leaving in its wake? Right? What is the collateral damage? And you're describing that collateral damage. And you both are well enough and smart enough to say, hold on, I better pay attention because it doesn't just go away. The damage stays unless we address it and clean it up, right?
yeah, yeah. And I, I think what you brought up, part of what really resonated is, you mentioned how, I didn't, fine, my wife was sick, and then I got her back. But when my wife wasn't there, it wasn't like just an absence or, benign missing of, the light and the happiness, it, it was the presence of, kind of a toxic, a toxicity in our relationship. It was
Sure.
really, and then even when I had my wife back, but then normal interactions were intolerable to me
Mhm.
because I had spent the past, year and a half or 2 years, you know, dealing with, kind of not normal, kind of interactions. And it left me with no tolerance for, kind of normal feedback and criticism. It all just felt like the same message coming back again. Oh,
Mhm.
no, you're not good enough.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Try a little bit harder, maybe.
Mhm.
And, and, and then, when she's finally doing okay, like, I guess
It
that's,
stays.
yeah, and that's when things are kind of, for me, we're sometimes at their worst because they, I guess because I wasn't, one is I wasn't actively needed to kind of focus on trying to help her and fix her, and two is when there's not this demanding need. So then I kind of I'd given up to an extent also on being perfect, and so then I wasn't able to take responsibility. I had lost any motivation to take responsibility for when I did mess up, when I did, you know, there were shortcomings, and I didn't do things
Mm.
as I wished I would have or could have.
Yeah. I think it's just profound. I really do. Because I think it really just, I hope that this kind of creates a greater level of awareness and of the intensity of the impact when we don't help, when we don't know what we're dealing with, when we don't get the help that you deserve. We're almost out of time, but I want to ask you about, to me, one of the biggest questions I always have is the decision to try again, the decision to have another baby. What was that like for you to, I know that it was really difficult, for Shifra. I'm wondering what it was like for you.
So I guess for better or for worse, God blessed me with a somewhat optimistic and hopeful disposition, um, and also being, kind of in the passenger seat of, the train wreck of our first experience. Um, and so, for me, I can, I was very clear to Shifra that I'm never gonna push you into, another pregnancy like that, or to go through that experience again. Um, but at the same time, I do want to have more children at some point. I wasn't planning on having two under two or even two under three. And, you know, after, kind of everything that we dealt with, you know, I wanted one at a time, preferably one set of diapers at a time as well. And, um, and so it became, regular conversations with our Rav and regular conversations with each other. And, at some point, conversations with a therapist and to try to help sort these things out. And for me, it was a part of me that would hope, like, that, okay, that time was bad, but next time might be better. And even if it isn't better, we can be much more prepared. I mean, one is, we were to expect. We were in a different financial situation. I was working, after I graduated from school, and she had connections to different therapists, and I guess we knew how to be proactive, and I was very optimistic and hopeful that it would be much easier the second time.
Mhm.
Um, And so making that decision was something that was it was a process that we went through, but for me it was relatively easy, but in a sense, complicated because kind of I gave over, as in a way like kind of ultimate decision making to Chipra, if this is something that she can do again, um and the interesting experience is that we had, thank God, our second child. And, part of, Shipra's fear was, also our first daughter was, everything around her, kind of birth and coming into life was difficult. But she was the easiest baby, you could imagine it's like, well, everyone says that it's never the same. So if you have an easy one, then you have a hard one next, and it's part of it, I guess her fear when thinking about having another child. And I don't know how it's possible, but the second one was even easier. And um, but the interesting thing is, now we're kind of still, I guess our story is still not fully written, So while I think everything was a little bit easier the second time, it was emotionally much harder
Mm.
because, oh, no, here we are again. And we did, gonna have the resources to get the help we needed when we needed it. And I think it was a somewhat shorter process, but it did take a toll. And it was really hard. And we're at this interesting space where we don't know what's next. And I still, I hope and I pray that one day we have another child. And I think Schiffer hopes and prays that we don't have another child. And it's still something we're trying to figure out and don't
Yeah.
know what's next. And um, time will tell, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it's so raw and and really vulnerable of you to share this, because I think that I know that this impacts other people significantly, because I think it's so difficult for someone to say, I don't want to have more. And then to hear the other side of, I do hope, but I also understand the physical and emotional implications of what that would mean for her and what that would mean for us. And all of those things are part of that consideration of the future. And then your willingness to say, but for right now, for today, this is where we are, right? This is
Yeah.
for today. And I don't know what the future holds, which is a really powerful and also difficult place to stay sometimes. I'm wondering if, as we wrap up our conversation, if you'd be willing to identify one or two misconceptions that you would like to clear up for the audience.
The two that jumped to mind first. One is that men don't suffer with postpartum depression, or they don't suffer with, their, wives or spouses, partners having postpartum depression. Because I think there are, both of those are presentations. And, um, both of those are things that happen. And well, I don't know if I would have gotten a diagnosis of postpartum depression. I'm sure if I tried to use insurance, I would have. But the but I was definitely struggling and suffering, as a result of, my wife's struggles and depression. And I think the second one is, that you mentioned, which is that, once you get through things, once you overcome, the challenge in the moment, that, um, okay, you made it through, it's over. Um, and that's not always how it is. Oftentimes, it takes a very long time to pick up the pieces, the collateral damage from the struggle, the pain, everything that happens when people are going through, a mood disorder and experiencing a mood disorder, um, and the impact that can have on the people around them. And that took us a long time to figure out. And so that's, I think, the second misconception that I would like to write in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want you to just update, tell us first of all, how are the children today? How are the little ones today who are so big already?
Yeah, they are 2.5 and 6.5 years
Okay.
old at this point. And they're both wonderful, amazing, beautiful little children, girls who we're so happy to have in our lives. Um,
They speak
like
fluent
any parent.
German, correct?
Okay, well, the 6.5 speaks fluent German, and the 2.5 doesn't speak fluent English either. So, but whatever she says, she jabbers off in German and English, just as
Right.
comfortably. And yeah, but Schiffer calls them sugar and spice.
Mhm.
Where the younger one is just this sweet little, kind of cuddle ball, and our older one is just full of spunk and life,
Mm.
um and loves to tell jokes and make people laugh and perform. And
I
yeah.
wonder where she gets that from.
Well,
Mhm.
yes, yeah, she looks like me and she acts like Shifra, and the other one looks like Shifra and acts like me. And so
Amazing.
a beautiful partnership on two children.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. So, for anybody who doesn't know, Yaakov and Shifra have been living in Berlin, Germany for several years with the Lauder Foundation. They're preparing for their move now to the United States. It has really been a pleasure and a special, special opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for being willing to do this. I guarantee you that there are going to be women, because it's a pretty primarily women who are listening, who will say, my husband needs to hear this, or begin to become a little bit more aware of the implication of health and wellness and mental health and wellness on the family. And I think that perhaps an opportunity to ask more questions of each other, to facilitate conversations between spouses, to say like, what was this like for you? And really learning and listening. And I think that's a great outcome for what we did here today. So thank you for saying yes. Thank you for agreeing. And if anybody wants to reach out to Yaakov, feel free to reach out through the practice, because I suspect someone's going to be like, I want him as my therapist because you're so cool. So thank you so much.
Sure thing. And thank you, Dora, for the opportunity and the platform.
A pleasure.